Those of you that were just watching our intro, that was almost 3 years ago, our first encounter with Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who for me remained the poster child of the excesses of COVID. And of course, Kelly was prescient in everything she was saying at the time, and she was roundly condemned for it, and yet turned out to be shockingly correct. I'm very excited about today's show. We are having Representative Harriet Hageman, U.S. Congresswoman from Wyoming, also a litigator with 34 years of experience. She is challenging federal overreach, particularly as it pertains to protecting our environment. And she is obviously from Wyoming. She loves Wyoming, and she wants conservative policies that actually conserve the environment. We're also going to talk to Benji Backer, who is an executive chairman and founder of the American Conservation Coalition. They have some very strong feelings about the climate hysteria. There is his book. There's Benji's book. I'll give you the particulars where you can find them on social media right after this.
Our laws, as it pertains to substances, are draconian and bizarre. The psychopaths start this way. He was an alcoholic because of social media and pornography, PTSD, love addiction, fentanyl and heroin. Ridiculous. I'm a doctor, for Christ's sake. Where the hell do you think I learned that? I'm just saying, you go to treatment before you kill people. I am a clinician. I observe things about these chemicals. Let's just deal with what's real. We used to get these calls on Loveline all the time. Educate adolescents and to prevent and to treat. If you have trouble you can't stop and you want to help stop it, I can help. I got a lot to say. I got a lot more to say.
I'm excited to bring you a new product, a new supplement, Fatty. I take it. I make Susan take it. My whole family takes it. This comes out of, believe it or not, dolphin research. The Navy maintains a fleet of dolphins, and a brilliant veterinarian recognized that these dolphins sometimes developed a syndrome identical to our Alzheimer's disease. Those dolphins were deficient in a particular fatty acid. She replaced the fatty acid, and they didn't get the Alzheimer's. Humans have the same issue. And we are more deficient in this particular fatty acid than ever before. And a simple replacement of this fatty acid called C15 will help us prevent these syndromes. It's published in a recent journal called Metabolites. It's a new nutritional C15, pentadecanoic acid it's called. The deficiency that we are developing for C15 creates something called the cellular fragility syndrome. This is the first nutritional deficiency syndrome to be discovered in 75 years and may be affecting us in many ways, and as many as 1 in 3 of us. This is an important breakthrough. Take advantage of it. Go to fatty15.com/Dr. Drew to receive 15% off a 90-day starter kit subscription, or use code Dr. Drew at checkout for that 15% off, or just go to our website, drdrew.com/fatty15. And as I said, we're very pleased to have Representative Harriet Hageman here. You can follow her on Rep Hageman, REPHAGEMAN on X. As well, you can find her at hageman.house.gov. And I'll give you a little bit about Benji, too. You can follow him at Benji Backer, BENJI.com, as well as on X, Benji Backer. Let's welcome Representative Harriet Hageman. Congresswoman, thank you for being here.
It's wonderful to be with you, Dr. Drew.
Let me start with just before we launch into the topic of the day, just your thoughts. Primarily, I assume you were in the Congress, the chambers yesterday during the presidential address. And I just wonder what it was like to experience some of the behavior on the one side of the aisle in response to these very touching stories of American stories and diverse stories and extraordinary stories that were highlighted last night, and yet one side of the room seemed like I'll use a kind word, out of touch with what the rest of us felt.
It was an incredible speech. It was full of hope, aspiration. It talked about a new renaissance in America. It was exciting to be there. And I think it was pretty sad, the display that the Democrats put on last night. And it was obvious that they had made the decision before they ever walked into the chambers that they were not going to clap, they were not going to stand, they were not going to react positively to anything that the president said. And he said that at the very beginning. He said, "You'll never clap for me. You'll never stand for me.
Yes, I saw
that. You'll never do anything positive." And I do think it reflected on them very poorly.
And he actually said something. He said, and I the part that caught my attention when he was calling out that side, he said, it's so sad. It's sad. And I think he meant it, that we can't get it together. We can't unify. But look, it just looks more and more out of touch. So have at it, everybody. Go enjoy yourselves. So let's talk a little bit about, speaking of out of touch, let's talk a little bit about our policies around climate. I wonder why, if there's an opportunity to restore some kind of sanity on the heels of COVID. In other words, I think people understand that there was a hysteria, there were excesses, our government behaved in ways that we never imagined they could, particularly on the state level. Perhaps the climate hysteria is similar. Start me there.
I think it's very similar, and I watched that clip with great interest simply because I worked with Jay Bhattacharya during the middle of that. I was involved in one of the very first lawsuits in the United States that was filed against the vaccine mandates. I'm a person who believes very strong in freedom, and I also believe in the science of these things, and it was very clear to me early on that what we were being told related to COVID was dishonest, and it was a mechanism to control the masses. And I think that you could look at climate change and global warming exactly the same way. It has evolved over the time from the 1970s to the 1980s to the 90s. And I read something the other day that I think is very important, which is you probably shouldn't put a deadline on Armageddon. And yet they have, because they can't help themselves. You know, all of the glaciers will be gone by 2012, and there will be no more ice. Antarctica will be gone by 2021. And you got to stop giving us a deadline, because when they pass, we can all look at the predictions that were made and call them out for what they're saying. And climate change and global warming.
I'm going to stop you right there, because I want to sort of talk about my frame on exactly that, which is I feel like a time traveler these days. I've seen these things come and go across a great timeline now. And one of them, certainly treatment of opiate addiction, and I've all that stuff, and what the I've seen crazy things come and go. But climate is another area, because I was a very active ecologist, if you remember the ecology movement in the early 70s. And so we had that flag with the kind of weird theta sign in it. And I was a scientist on that front, and I was convinced that I would say the two greatest things we were convinced of was A, massive famine coming our way. The population was too great, we couldn't feed everybody, and acid rain would make it impossible for even this country to feed itself. Acid rain, algae blooms in rivers, and then a coming ice age. That was the other. A coming ice age was going to take us out. And by the way, oil done in 20 years. Maximum we had was 20 years. And the ozone, we had all these theories. And good science, by the way. But the built on bad assumptions, bad data, because the magnitude of the data we're looking at, this cosmological scale of everything. So I come as a time traveler to this story, and am skeptical as a result.
What's interesting is if there's a hole in the ozone layer, which is what we were being told in the 70s and 80s, and we were all going to die. If there's a hole in the ozone layer, you don't have the greenhouse gas effect that they're now claiming is causing global warming and climate change. So they keep switching it up, I guess, to keep us unsure as to where they're going to go next. Yeah.
That's right. So keep going forward. So I like to be a moderate on most things. I'm willing to say the climate is warming, although it's warming from a pretty cool spot. It seems like, again, on the cosmological scale, and humans might be contributing. That makes sense to me. But so what? Help me understand what we should be worried about.
What they ignore is the fact that we have the ability to innovate. And I think that that's the point you're making when you talk about being a time traveler. Whenever they make these predictions, they're essentially assuming that nothing is going to change in our ability to adapt to that
That's right.
particular situation.
100%.
If you've got erosion, then you deal with it by building, a cement wall. If you've got a situation where we have the catastrophic forest fires, which we actually do, but that's caused by bad forest management, then we can better manage those resources. Just like what we recently saw in California, the amount of carbon and particulates and toxins that went into the air as a result of that fire, humanity would not be responsible for over the next several hundred years. What you have to understand is, number one, we can adapt, but so does our climate, so does our environment, and we've done a dang good job of protecting our environment while, as you say, feeding the masses and improving our entire condition, improving our financial situation, improving our standard of living in ways unrivaled in human history.
And of course, here in the state of California, we have these ridiculous regulations that are counter conservation, counter ecological, and do exactly what you just described, set us up to have carbon put into the environment at a scale that we could eliminate automobiles in this state for 30 years, and we just undid all that, everything we could have done. So what's on your crosshairs? What's on your radar? Where are you fighting the fight right now?
I don't believe in energy poverty. I believe that it is not the role of government to make people's lives miserable. And I'm just going to tell you a very quick story about my mother. My mother is 101 years old. And when you think about how her life has changed over the last 100 years, when she was young, they would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to milk the cows. They chopped the wood. They tended the garden. They canned the food. They worked in the field. They did all of those things, but it was more of a subsistence type of living. In 100 years, look at the homes we live in, the cars that we drive, the travel, our clothing, our jewelry. Everything about us has changed so dramatically. The increase in life expectancy, the decrease in infant mortality rate, and every bit of that is because of the commercial production of affordable energy. Yet when we have these debates, nobody talks about the opportunity costs. So if we do away with affordable energy, what does that do in terms of increasing infant mortality rate? What does that do in terms of our lifestyle? What does that do in terms of our prosperity? Those opportunity costs are never addressed. And again, it's this idea of adaptation and recognizing that we really can make decisions about how we take care of our environment, and we can do it in an incredibly effective way without destroying everything that we have built up and created over the last 100 years.
Right. And again, I'm just imagining your mom. I'm assuming she's from Wyoming also, as a pioneer of a job. It's a little house on the prairie, literally, in your mom's case.
We lived in a house that we didn't have a telephone. We didn't have a TV most of the time growing up. We had a wood burning stove, and we would take, big catalogs, Montgomery Ward catalogs, put them on the stove to warm them up at night, wrap them in fabric, and take them to bed. Now, granted, I lived a little bit isolated because of where the ranch was in Wyoming, and a lot of people in my generation didn't have to live that way. But I'm telling you, as someone who did, as someone who grew up that way, I don't want to return to it. And yet that is what we push when we push this radical climate agenda that's really an anti-humanist view of the world. Where, as I often say, you can either be a champion of abundance or you can be a lord of scarcity. I believe we should be champions of abundance. We should be looking at ways to innovate, to make sure that we can feed the masses, that we can provide the energy resources. I do not believe that, again, government should try to make people's lives miserable. Yet that's what the entire global warming and climate change crowd is about.
Yeah, I agree. The Panicsville makes no sense. And when I think about one way of understanding the human experience is something that is sort of, in some circles, called Homo economicus, right? Is that man is an economic, it's socially an economic phenomenon. And when we need to fix things, when the economics drives the opportunity and the need, we do it. But whenever, I can't think of a single situation, maybe they're out there, I don't know, but where the government forces it, where it either happens, I can't think of things where anything even happens, or where it happens well without enormous cost that doesn't necessarily become justified.
Well, what you find in those countries that are ruled by dictators and despots is that they use natural resources and food as a weapon to control their people. Sudan is a classic example of that. Been in the throes of a civil war for years. What was one of the very first things that they did when they started having these intergovernment squabbles? They moved everybody off the farms. They urbanized them. They put them in refugee camps. Now, over 90% of the food that is consumed in Sudan is imported. So whenever they want to control the people, they shut off the food supply. And when you look throughout history, that's really what dictators do. Dictators use natural resources and access to natural resources, access to food, access to fuel to control the masses. Now, is that an extreme example? Of course it is. But the point that I'm trying to make is our capitalism, the way that we produce things, the way that we innovate, the way that we solve problems can address these kinds of issues. Whereas we have a situation in California where Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom, they're looking at, oh my gosh, there might be a 1 degree increase 100 years from now. So we need to make everybody's life miserable today and take away property rights, dictate what they can eat, how they can travel, what kind of vehicles they can drive. That is not only not the American way, it is so contrary to human nature and contrary to freedom that you can't even imagine people like this can get elected. It does not make sense in a country like ours when we show year after year and decade after decade that not only can we protect our environment, but we can produce things to elevate the human condition in a way that is unrivaled in human history. And look at how well we're doing it.
You know, you mentioned dictatorships being restricting access to food and whatnot, resources. But would it not be accurate to say that it's really any centralized totalitarian state? And if that's true, whether it's one leader or a bureau of leaders, whatever, what happened to us? What do you have a theory? I mean, you've sort of had a ringside seat. What the heck? Did COVID create some wrinkle in, some expose something that we fell into? Or what do you say?
It started before COVID, but COVID was a natural outcome of it. I would say it started with Woodrow Wilson thinking that the experts should control our lives. That was elevated under FDR with creating the administrative state. And then over the last 80 years, we've had a situation where we've allowed the bureaucracy to creep into areas that we never should have allowed it. So under our form of government, separation of powers, it's the legislative branch that legislates. But over time, we've allowed the executive branch to do that. But none of those people are accountable. The president may be because he is elected, but the bureaucrats, do you know who was the head of the EPA under Joe Biden? Of course you didn't. Most people didn't. No. They're unaccountable because they're unelected. And as a result, they can do things and make really bad policies that are incredibly costly. Again, Deb Haaland, she was the head of the Department of Interior under Joe Biden. One day she was before our Natural Resource Committee, and I said, why is it that every single policy you adopt furthers energy poverty? Why do you want to do that? She said, I've never heard that term. And I said, yeah, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory. You know what I'm talking about. The only answer she could give was, we're in a transition. And I said, that word is meaningless. What does that mean? What is a transition? This is the head of one of the most important agencies in the United States of America. And she cannot describe for me what they're doing or why with the policies that they're pursuing. That is an unelected bureaucrat. That's how we lost our freedoms and we lost control of our government. We need to be bringing that back. That's why I'm doing a lot of work in this space with reform of the administrative state. I am the chairman of the Article 1 task force, and the very purpose of this is to make sure that it is the legislative branch that is legislating, not people who are unaccountable to our voters.
Wow, I did not know you were at the head of that, because in the course of talking to people about COVID, I've spoken to people that had positions and interacted with the bureaucrats, and they were hearing directly from bureaucrats that they were insolent. They felt they were in charge. These outsiders come in for 4 years and they really don't matter. And I was shocked when I first heard that. Now it's obvious that's what's going on, and I'm fascinated that you take it back to Woodrow Wilson. That's where I have landed as well. when you just you keep kind of, I thought it was going to end in like the early 60s. I'd see the start of all this there, and then sort of think about FDR as sort of an anomaly, but no. It started with Wilson. It was clear the Jacobins would have been very proud of Woodrow Wilson. Let's put it that way. I think they would have been very proud.
That's exactly right. And keep in mind, the 16th and 17th Amendments came about during that period of time, being the one giving the federal government the authority to do an income tax, and then also basically excluding the state from government on the federal level by taking away our 2 senators being appointed by states and just being voted on by, just like our Congresses. That was never intended. The House of Representatives was to represent the people. The Senate was to represent the states. And then you had the executive branch that represented the executive branch, the president, the federal government. And when they changed that with that amendment, it fundamentally changed the relationship between the states and the federal government.
So I'm hearing the name McKinley come up now too. And I thought, oh, that makes sense. McKinley pre-Spanish-American War. And is that what we have to dial this back to? And if so, how are you going to do it?
Well, again, we as legislators, we need to become better as practitioners. So really, a lot of the power comes from what's called the Administrative Procedure Act that was adopted in 1946. And it has largely remained unchanged in the intervening 80 years. But it's under the Administrative Procedure Act that these agencies have gotten the power for the rulemaking, for example. And it's expanded in a way that is so far beyond even what FDR ever could have imagined. I'll give you an example of how these administrative agencies work to expand their own authority without Congress ever stepping in. And I'm going to say this: Congress has largely abdicated its responsibility for legislating, and that's what I'm fighting to bring back. We've got great people in the House right now, and we're all working towards that. Our senators are as well. I should say the Republicans are. We're working towards administrative reform, exactly what I'm talking about. But under the Clean Water Act, the EPA only has jurisdiction of navigable waters of the United States, right? Navigable waters of the United States, the Mississippi, the Missouri, those kinds of big bodies of water. I represented a farmer one time who had moved an irrigation ditch on his property. The EPA came in and sued him, and they claimed that irrigation ditch was a navigable water of the United States, and he had to have a 404 permit to move that ditch. When we finally went to trial, that case took 6 years. When we finally went to trial, he was facing penalties of almost $65 million because at that time, EPA could impose penalties of $37,500 a day. It's now up to $68,000 a day. Well, we as Congress have given that kind of power to an administrative agency. Of course they're going to abuse it. They abuse it every day, because it increases their power. It allows them more authority. It allows them to take control of more things. And so when you've got people in these agencies who really are anti-humanist, this is the way that they further their agenda. Now, after a 2-week trial, I won that lawsuit. But I had a jury of our peers, and I won that case. But my client spent $1 million on attorney's fees and costs defending himself against a rogue agency. That's what we have to rein in and make sure never happens again.
I know to you from the great state of Wyoming, that sounds outrageous. From the once glorious state of California, that sounds routine. Because it really does. We have this thing called the Coastal Commission that does things like that to people all the time. And now they have now their policy, as stated, is reclamation, which means if your building or supportive structures are damaged by the ocean, too bad. The ocean will just reclaim it. Reclamation. It's unbelievable. It's really, talk about anti-humanist.
As an attorney, I've encountered the California Coastal Commission before. And again, that is one of those agencies that has become very totalitarian in its viewpoint of the world. And I'll go back again to these fires. Over 50% of the fires in Southern California are started either by arson or homeless, or maybe it's a combination of both. And I know that there's also some issues associated with fires related to power lines. But the fact is, that what happened in November was largely a man-made disaster because they won't,
Yes.
the California Coastal Commission and the various so-called environmental agencies out there will not allow the clearing of the brush. Under the 2001 roadless rule that was put in place by Bill Clinton, denied access, management, and use to 58.5 million acres of National Forest Service lands. These are all really bad policies that end up destroying our environment, and yet it's the environmentalists that push forward with them. But then we eventually have to pick up the pieces and then deal with the consequences of those terrible decisions, because again, they will not consider opportunity costs when they adopt these sweeping declarations of how they're going to allow us to use our property. It really does need to change.
I think calling it opportunity cost is kind. It's just the downstream consequences of their actions. And it's grotesque. Don't they? It's like it's not learning, is what it is. It's unwilling to learn, not willing to look at the consequences. Speaking of learning, I think Benji is going to present some of this stuff, but I wonder if there is specific science you rely on to. I'm sure there's got to be arguments about, oh my God, it is a disaster. It isn't a disaster. I talked to a really fine scientist who, put the whole warming trend on the sun. And he was a MIT scientist, and he said, these are all my D students. He called it the revenge of the D students who are making the climate change declarations that they were. But is there science you lean on to help support you in your arguments?
So one of the things that they've done is they've so corrupted the climate data that it's essentially unusable at this period in time. And most of their work is being done by the models, which is garbage in, garbage out. They're computer models. So what do I mean by destroying the climate data? They homogenize between two weather stations. So you might have a weather station that has a 100-year history out in a field which has not been changed. And when they go gather that data, we can demonstrate that there's no trend line in that data. You're not seeing increased warming or decreased temperatures. What you're seeing is variability, which is called weather. But the stations that they manipulate, so let's say there was a station out east of Denver 40 years ago. Well, now we have DIA. That weather station may still exist, but it is now being affected by what's often referred to as the urban heat index or other types of development around that. So they need to adjust that data, but instead of adjusting the temperatures down to account for all of this development and industrial activity around it, they actually increase the temperature using that data. So what they've done, and they talked about it in all of the emails with the East Anglian University, they manipulate the data. They're not using raw data and saying, you can look at a weather station that has been unimpacted by man, essentially, and what you'll see is that there is no warming trend. What you'll see is variability called weather. So we know that they're manipulating the data. We know they're manipulating the temperature. NOAA has satellite data, temperature data. They won't share it. They also won't tell us how they're manipulating the data. It's a black box. They won't tell us how they make these adjustments. But if you watch their data, if you watch their ticker tape, if you will, you can watch it happen in real time. This is what they're doing. We are being manipulated to the tune of trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars worldwide, and much of it is based upon manipulated data.
Had we not just been through COVID and I saw what continues to happen to the medical publication world, I would have been skeptical of what you're saying. Now I'm not completely on board with it. What is, you said there are trillions of dollars, at issue here. Is that what this is all about? Is it follow the money? I mean, what's motivating all this? Or is it just a bureaucracy that got put in place and now it's convention, or all of the above?
All of the above, and look at the money. Do you think that if I'm not a scientist, I'm an attorney, but let's say that you were going to publish a paper about how they've manipulated the data, are you going to get a grant from the university or the EPA or the, right. There are so many agencies involved. It's a medical publication thing. The same thing happens in medicine right now, same thing. If you have some data that shows the vaccine is causing problems, no one will touch it, period, end of deal. And that's that. We have politicized science.
Please go ahead, finish.
We have politicized science.
Yeah, which is wild to me. It's just, I again, part of my time traveler experience here. And by the way, we have forgotten the delicate instrument that science actually is, which is something that Brett Weinstein keeps saying. Science is fundamentally an instrument, a delicate instrument, where you're going to ask a question, and the null hypothesis is either confirmative or non-confirmative, based on a good experiment, based on good assumptions. That's it. And you can only ask very narrow, very specific, very tiny questions to expect anything worthwhile out of the instrument we call the scientific method. Can you stay with us, Congresswoman? Are you available to continue when we bring Benji in here?
Sure.
All right. I'm curious to see you guys interact, so I appreciate you staying. And are there places you want people to go other than where I've already been sending people on your behalf?
No, that's just fine. And Brett Weinstein is a hero of mine. I think he's exposed a lot of very important machinations out there that we should all know about.
Yes. Oh, 100%. I've spoken with him. He ran up to me one time after I gave a talk. I was bringing up this issue. I've had the very privilege of having had excellent scientific training, and I said, "Science is not being done anymore." And he ran up to me. He goes, "That's it. That's my point." And I thought, "Oh yeah, good. Somebody else sees it too." Rep Hageman, REP HAGEMAN on X, and Hageman.house.gov. Representative Harriet Hageman with us. We'll be right back after this with Benji Backer joining us. Well, you've heard me praise Paleo Valley's grass-fed finished beef bone broth and the delicious meat sticks. I now want to turn it over to Paleo Valley founder and CEO, Autumn Smith, to tell you about her company's food philosophy.
I'm here to help create the products that make healthy food convenient in our modern world. The diet and the food you're consuming is absolutely related to your digestive health, to your mental health, to every aspect of your health. The devil's in the details here. And not only do we have to attend to every single ingredient, we have to support a system with whole foods. And so when we source a product, it's going to be organic, it's going to be tested for pesticides, and then it's going to be grass-fed and finished or pasture-raised. It's going to be raised on regenerative American farms.
The protein sticks that come in 8 varieties are likewise impeccably sourced and prepared.
And the fermentation process came about because there was an ingredient that I didn't like in meat sticks that's pretty widespread. It's called encapsulated citric acid, and it's derived from GMOs and then hydrogenated oil, and it just melts into the beef stick, and you don't have to label it. That's the thing. You can label it citric acid.
Make 2025 a year to cut out the chemicals and feed yourself correctly. Go to drdrew.com/PaleoValley for 15% off your first order, 20% off when you subscribe. That is drdrew.com/PaleoValley.
Dr. Drew said the best way to quit drinking is by going cold turkey, and he's a doctor, so why would you question doctors?
Dr. Drew called me unfixable.
Bird flu is in the news, and of course it is becoming a bit worrisome. Perhaps they've been tinkering with it with gain of function, and of course there's been ineffective mass culling of birds, so a new flock of birds comes in that is not immune yet, so we can expose them to the virus, so it can mutate. And of course there is the reckless fear-mongering out there. Regardless, it is now the time to be rationally ready for whatever comes next. Of course, the Wellness Company has the emergency kits available for you, and they have stepped up their support for America's frontline farmers. There's a new variant of bird flu, D1.1, and it shows some concerning mutations, and it's causing lower lung infections, pneumonia, that sort of thing. And here's what TWC is doing. They've helped 1 million plus stay prepared for emergencies with the great emergency kits, and now they are stepping up to protect farmers and our food supply. They have provided for free our most useful kit for this outbreak to the hundreds of thousands of farm workers out there at risk of exposure. If you want to get your kit, or if you know somebody works, because again, you're not going to get their bird flu, but the farm workers might. And so we wanted to give them kits for free so as they could take Tamiflu, they could be prepared if they get sick. If you want a kit, go to drdrew.com/TWC for 10% off any of the 7 emergency kits or any of the other products there for that matter. Again, that is drdrew.com/TWC for 10% off. And I believe, I'm not sure, Caleb, do we have the click-through there for the farm workers? We were trying to give access through the website for people who work in farms, whatnot, to get their telehealth meeting, which we give them as well, and then the kits so they can have that on hand should there be conjunctivitis, lower pulmonary infections, that kind of thing. I think this is going to be not a big deal. The fact that anybody is even thinking about it, I mean, that the public at large is thinking about it, is more fear-mongering. There's polydrug-resistant tuberculosis. There's indigenous dengue being transmitted here in Southern California. Way more serious things than this, unless you're a farm worker. And TWC wanted to step up and help those guys.
How dare you, Dr. Drew? You killed my grandmother.
Here we go. So Representative Harriet Hageman is still with us, U.S. Congresswoman from Wyoming. And joining us now is Benji Backer, the executive chairman and founder of the American Conservation Coalition, co-founder of Nature is Nonpartisan. I love that. Authored The Conservative Environmentalist in 2024. We can put that book up there. University of Washington graduate. There he is, Forbes 30 under 30. Backer is a fellow at Free Op and Arizona State University. Find more about him at Benji Backer on X, and his website is benjibacker.com. So welcome, Benji. I don't know if you had a chance to hear the conversation I was having with Representative Hageman, but lots of interesting stuff she was presenting from my standpoint. I wonder if you wanted to pile on from your perspective.
Well, look, it's great to be here, and it's great to be with the Congresswoman. We were talking before we got on. She's the representative of my favorite state, and the state that I hope to be a resident of very soon. So it's great to be here with both of you. I have this very deep frustration about the environmental movement, which is that it's been co-opted by partisan politics. The environment is one of the few issues that should not be caught up in partisan culture wars. We don't actually have very different ideologies when it comes to solving this challenge when it comes to outcomes. And for so long, before I was born, the environment was something that transcended party lines. But today it's been co-opted by the left to be made into a political issue, to hijack into basically a warfare on humanity, and especially the rural middle America.
Let me stop you. I'm going to stop Benji, because I was talking to the Congresswoman in the last segment about being a time traveler, and I'm a time traveler on this front too, which is I remember when the left had control of the environmentalist movement, essentially. They were identified with it, let's put it that way. They're identified with it, because I was part of it. I was in it. And then there became, I don't know why they particularly made it their issue, but they did, and they were very effective. And it became an American issue. It became, everybody embraced it. It was not partisan. So I wonder if Representative Hageman, if you have that historical perspective too, and understand what Benji's talking about, how it has become partisan, or why it remains partisan.
Well, I do have that history. I remember what was going on in the early 1970s. But one of the things that we did do is that we actually went in and cleaned up the rivers and the industrial sites. We all worked very, very hard at that. I'm not saying that I'm opposed to the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act. I'm not opposed to any of those things. I support the Endangered Species Act. I support the Federal Land Policy Management Act. I support those because they had a purpose, and we have used them very effectively to address the problems that we had with our streams and rivers and the air pollution that we had. But that's what my point is. We have the ability to innovate, and we've done that. And we've done an absolutely phenomenal job. And in doing so, we've also been able to provide energy at an absolutely, an incredibly affordable rate. And in doing that, we have increased life expectancy. We've decreased infant mortality rate. We have made innovations in the medical field, in curing cancer, in how do we treat osteoporosis. There are so many things that we've done, but we've done that because of affordable energy, and we've done that through innovation. What's happened with the latest with the more recent environmental movement is they want to take away all of the innovation and claiming we're destroying the environment. But once they take away the innovation, once they take away affordable energy, we don't get to innovate anymore. Go to a third world country and tell me how they take care of the environment, because the fact is they don't. Right. They can't afford to. They're just trying to feed their people and keep a roof over their heads. Look at the kind of respiratory problems that we have in Africa because we will not allow them to develop reliable electricity. We force them to cook over dung and wood. The challenges, and Dr. Drew, I know that you know this, the health problems that they have in those countries are because we refuse to allow them to do what we have done, which is develop affordable and reliable energy.
Benji, how do you make it nonpartisan?
Well, look, I completely agree with that. And caring about the environment is not only a privilege, but it's also something that is a hobby for most Americans. it's really tapping into the fact that caring about the environment, whether you hunt or you hike or you fish or you ski, it's something that we share as Americans. And tapping back into that, putting the environment back into environmentalism and taking the politics out of it is actually how you do it first. It's something that we have the same desired outcome for. We all love spending time outdoors. We know the importance of clean air and clean water. We know the importance of biodiversity and wildlife. This is something that we understand as Americans. Almost half of the U.S. is biodiversity, and it's worse across, oceans, which the Congresswoman just mentioned. Over half our biodiversity is being destroyed by humanity. We have a duty to protect it, but we have to take the partisan politics out of it. And to do that, you have to look at sensible solutions. The solutions that the left has proposed, which is taking away energy, it's taking away people's cars and their livelihoods, is not the way to getting to solutions. It's innovating our way out of the problem, and it's conservation, not preservation. We can get into that, but those are all values that conservatives hold and liberals should hold, and together we could work towards real outcomes if we put the politics aside.
But you have to remember there's an hysteria afoot. And I become very interested in mass formation and hysteria as a result of COVID. And when you have so-called true believers in the mix, you can't use rational discourse like you're suggesting. They're using it as a cudgel. They are getting more out of it than there should be a pure concern for environmentalism. But explain to me what you mean by conservation versus preservation.
Well, look, first on your point, it's a great point. I would say that the loudest voices that are the most extreme are actually in the minority, thankfully. Most Americans aren't extreme environmentalists. The future of environmentalism cannot be dominated by Greta Thunberg and AOC and these radical voices because they actually don't speak for the majority of Americans, including left-leaning Americans. Most Americans want pragmatism on the environment. Most Americans want conservation and sensible measures to be taken. It's just not dominating in the media cycle that we have today. What that looks like is, the leftist approach so far has been this preservation, don't touch anything. The environment is to be protected at all costs, which I'm the biggest environmentalist out there. But when you have this kind of hands-off approach, which is what preservation is, then you have these, intense wildfires like we've seen out in the West. You have all these other problems that exist because you're not in there actively managing and making sure that ecosystems and biodiversity and humanity are all thriving at the same time. When you allow local landowners and you allow local stakeholders to be involved in the process of taking care of the environment, you get the best results because local people know how to take care of their local environments best. Farmers, ranchers.
Slow down. You mean centralization? Centralization is not the answer to every ill. It's not better when you centralize things 3,000 miles away and put it in the hands of bureaucrats? Doesn't that make things better? I'm confused.
Well, that unknown EPA administrator, like the Congresswoman was mentioning, that's 3,000 miles away from the problem, yes, does not know how to take care of the area better than the person who lives there does. And so you wonder why we have worsening wildfires. It's because we're not allowing local communities to take care of their forests. The government's coming in saying you're not allowed to take care of your forests. And if you want to help fight
forest fires, it's why we have homeless. It's why COVID was such a disaster. The more you take things away. Adam Smith had it right. It's the two people interacting as your most efficient unit in all aspects of these sorts of, again, human social constructs. Medicine is the last frontier, and it's been completely co-opted and centralized. All right, Congresswoman, you're going to speak.
So what I look at is we're watching Germany deindustrialize right before our eyes, and they're doing it all in the name of climate change and global warming, and they're making their people miserable, and ultimately it's going to crash their economy, and it's destroying their ability to produce the things that they need. So one of the things that I think the radical environmentalists have failed to recognize is that humans are part of the natural environment as well, and they want to exclude humans as being part of the baseline. But we are part of the baseline. We've existed here since the beginning of time. So when we're managing these resources, we have to be balancing the various interests. We have 1,000 grizzly bears in Wyoming. Our recovery goal was 500. We've had a recovered grizzly bear population for over 2 decades. We can't get the Fish and Wildlife Service to delist the grizzly bear because by refusing to delist the grizzly bear, they control large swaths of land in Wyoming. In the meantime, it's been devastating to our elk population. It's a huge risk to our farmers and our ranchers and our anglers and our hikers and our recreationists. So all of these things, when they try to pretend that humans are not part of the natural environment, then when they insert us, they say, and look at how you ruined everything. When in fact, we haven't ruined anything. We've made things better.
Yeah, look, I mean, when economies are strong and people's livelihoods are good, the environment ends up being protected because then we actually can go in there and protect it. I was touring a native tribe in Washington State a couple of years ago, and I asked the tribal member how they are so economically successful, and because this is one of the most economically successful tribes in the country. And also how they helped restore the salmon population, because they also helped do that. And they said those two things went hand in hand. The fact that we were economically successful allowed us to put the money into restoring the salmon population. It allowed us to conserve the salmon population because we weren't worried about taking care of our basic needs. Humans interact with the environment every single day. Us being on this call takes up energy and takes up resources that takes from the environment. We have a role in protecting it, but that means we need to be involved in it. And that's why conservation is so much better than preservation.
Benji, I'm going to ask you the same thing I asked Congresswoman Hageman. What is in your crosshairs right now? Where is the battle lines being drawn? What are you fighting hardest? What are you concerned about?
Well, I think what I'm concerned about is that we allow the radical extremes to continue dominating this conversation, because right now it's an all or nothing approach. We either need the Green New Deal or we're not going to do anything. We're just going to overdevelop the country and not care about the environment whatsoever. I'm over dramatizing that, but that's kind of how the conversation is going. We're trying to drive a conversation that's right there, balanced in the middle. Like you said, it might not be the most sexy these days in the news cycle that we're in, but we've put together an amazing group of people. We have the former head of the Sierra Club and former Trump cabinet members who are working closely with this administration on our board together, because there's a lot of shared outcomes that we have at Nature is Nonpartisan that we believe Americans want on behalf of our environment in a sensible way. And the AOCs of the world and the people who only critique the AOCs and don't provide their own agendas are the problem. And I would say the Congresswoman probably understands that better than anyone, because she's in Congress dealing with those sorts of realities every single day. There's no incentive to solve problems right now. The incentive is to just oppose the other side's ideas and create fear-mongering. I saw the National Park Conservation Association say that Donald Trump was about to destroy, and it was the beginning of the end of the national park system in the United States because he's the president. When in reality, he signed the biggest national park bill into law when he was president last time. He doesn't want to destroy the national parks, but they're dictating that message and Americans are following. So we have to take this issue out of that back and forth. Otherwise, we're not going to get the results that we need, and we're trying to pierce our way through that.
I'm assuming you guys are both working with the Interior Department, and I would call Doug Burgum a friend. I used to go to North Dakota when he was governor and give presentations on various things on his behalf and his wife's. And he's a very smart dude. and he is from the Dakotas, and he has always had great respect and concern. He was actually a bison rancher for a minute. He gave me a long story about that. And how difficult those are apparently to ranch. And I'm imagining he's an ally in this fight you guys are waging?
I believe that he is, and I look forward to working with him. Again, what we have to look at with all of this discussion is the balance. And it's a balance that is going to benefit everybody. It's going to ensure that we have the prosperity to protect our environment. And when you get out of balance, like Germany has, is when you see the destruction of your economy and your ability then to preserve what it is you claim to want to preserve.
Completely agree. And there's nobody that understands the role of balance and conservation than Doug Burgum. I mean, he's a passionate outdoorsman. He understands the importance of energy. He doesn't pick winners and losers when it comes to energy, and he cares deeply about protecting our national wonders. Now, what he's done, the left is not going to give him credit for this. He is the major funder of the Teddy Roosevelt Presidential Library at Teddy Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota. He's one of the biggest advocates for the environment I have ever seen. And he's probably the closest to nature that we've had for any DOI secretary in recent history, at least in my lifetime. He's the best advocate that we can have for the environment. And that's why we're working with him on a plan called Make America Beautiful Again, which hopefully will take shape soon.
And it's interesting, you never really heard much discussion about this, but North Dakota is a significant oil producing state, and he understands that and the impact and how to mitigate it and what the business is. He really knows that business because his state. And by the way, I remember they have issues with indigenous folks up there too, and they would benefit from the oil industry when it would come in, and they could solve problems on their behalf too. And by problems, I mean stuff I was dealing with, alcoholism and mental health stuff and things like that that some of the groups were struggling with. So RFK Jr. also comes from this. It's interesting. You and I, Representative and I, were talking about. I guess when Benji stepped in, we started talking about the right versus left divide and the history of that. RFK Jr. was a Democrat, environmentalist, activist, and now he's I don't know what, independent or something. Is he, I know he's got his eye on some other issues, a couple of other issues, but is he somebody that also is helping you guys at all?
So really what you have to go back to is extremism doesn't help anybody. And when you start realizing what extremism is, it really opens your eyes very, very quickly. You've talked about COVID several times. They made huge mistakes at the very beginning by lying to us about the origin of it. Anybody with a lick of sense knew that it came from the Wuhan laboratory. That was not difficult to figure out, but we had our powers that be and our betters that were lying to us about those things. Well, then that undermines our trust in them with everything that they did after that. And I think that that's what's happening with someone like an RFK Jr. is that he's looking at, he was walking down this road and had been for decades, but he's smart enough and he's intelligent enough and he's discerning enough. And discernment is incredibly important. That is a skill or that is a character trait that we need more people to have discernment. He is discerning enough to recognize that he has been fed a line on certain things and he started questioning it and saying, I really don't believe this. I'm going to find out more about it and I'm going to surround myself with people and I'm going to ask questions. One of the frustrations that I have when I'm doing my committee work in Congress is there are these bombs that are thrown at us all the time. Okay, I think that we should delist species that are fully recovered so that we can spend our money on recovering species that still need help. The first reaction is, you want to kill all wildlife? Well, no, I'm not trying to kill all wildlife. I want to focus on species that need it, not on species that are fully recovered and the states can manage. But that's the extremism that we deal with in politics anymore, is there's no effort to say, hey, you know what? The grizzly bear's recovered. I think everybody ought to come together. We'll get it delisted and we'll move on to the next one. That doesn't allow them to control large swaths of land and water, and that's why we have this battle that we do. But RFK is a discerning man, and he's figured out a lot of stuff.
I agree with you about discernment, and discernment is a more formal process, but I would be very happy with more common sense. That'd be good enough for me. If people just manifested just basic, not even common sense, a reality assessment, be able to assess reality in reality's term. Benji, what were you saying?
Well, one of the most important things that RFK focuses on is the importance of sustainable, regenerative agriculture and just healthy food systems. And the United States creates and produces food better than anywhere else in the world, and that's not just a talking point; it's the truth. I mean, they're cutting down the rainforest to grow food there when we could be doing it here in the United States and supporting American farmers. So I'm totally all in on his agenda there. But let me say something about the unlikely allies that President Trump has put together. That's the unlikely stakeholders that we could put together to protect the environment too in a sensible way. What the Congresswoman just talked about, we need reform on the Endangered Species Act so that it's more effective, not so we can kill off endangered species, so that it can be more effective. Right. And that's what we're working on with this administration, not just ESA reform, national parks, wildlife, ecosystem restoration. Let's restore America's beauty and our environment, because that's what's in disrepair. And it's not because fossil fuels and the right, killing every animal. It's because our two-party system has no incentive to solve problems. And if Donald Trump steps in and says, we want to make America beautiful again, we want to protect America's ecosystems and wildlife and beauty, and we want to do it in a conservation-first way, allow local stakeholders to lead when it comes to these efforts, and put our natural beauty first, stop talking about climate change and carbon emissions in the atmosphere and China and all that stuff. Let's protect the environment here at home. I think we can actually get really far and reform these policies to make the environment protected in a more efficient, sensible way and stop wasting government taxpayer dollars on programs that don't work. They actually hurt the environment more than they help. And that's the sort of approach that I think this president is going to deploy. And I think RFK and other members of his cabinet are going to support it, and it will be one of his greatest legacy items.
And then Caleb is throwing up there how RFK had cleaned up the Hudson River, which was such a mess, and now you could go out there and swim in it or drink it. But let's wrap this up with you guys telling me where. I'll start with Benji first. What do you want people to do? Where do you want them to go?
Well, first, I think check out Nature is Nonpartisan. We're launching on March 20th in the center of America, the Geographic Center, Belle Fourche, South Dakota, where we'll be launching the new environmental movement of the future. We're basically recreating and rebranding the entire environmental movement as it was supposed to be, a nonpartisan issue that puts Americans first and the environment first at the same time. Check that out. But also, I think if you have been dismayed by the environmental conversation over the last few decades, I don't blame you. But engage. We need sensible people engaged in the conservation environment dialogue. They haven't been for a while. We've let the inmates run the asylum and the crazy people dictate the policies. You care about it more than they do. You care about the environment more than anybody else because you are sensible. Engage. We need you.
Thank you, Benji. And Representative Hageman?
I just think it's incredibly important that we have this kind of a venue to be able to talk about these issues because they are so important. I want to work with Benji. I want to work with the White House. I want to work with Democrats. I want to work with anybody to move our country forward to make sure that we can maintain our prosperity while also addressing these environmental issues. It's so critically important that we get this right because right now we really are destroying our national forests. We're destroying large swaths of our BLM lands. There are so many things that we're doing because of mismanagement, because the regulatory agencies in Washington, D.C. lost their way many, many years ago and don't recognize that management is part of what they're supposed to be doing. As Benji says, they want to just build a fence around it and say nobody can touch it from now until the end of time. That really is incredibly destructive to our environment. I also want to say oil and gas, coal, uranium, these are the energy of the future because they provide affordable energy and allow us to manage these resources in a way that really, again, is unrivaled in human history. We know what we've done with the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act, but the ESA, NEPA, we need reform so that we can continue to do what we've done over time, even better, while at the same time feeding the masses and making sure that we have affordable housing and that we've got good conditions for people to live. That's one of the things we didn't even talk about. All of these things relate to the fact that our housing costs are absolutely off the charts because we're not allowed to use the resources right here in the United States. Most of our building supplies are being imported from Canada because we're watching our national forest burn to the ground. That makes no sense. It just doesn't make any sense. So we need permitting reform. We need to be approaching these issues with much more common sense and discernment than we have been for quite some time.
Thank you both for joining us. Thank you for the work you're doing. I hope you will update us, particularly Congresswoman. I hope you update me on that Article 1 project. That is fascinating to me and seeing how that plays out. Thank you both for being here. We appreciate it very, very much.
Thank you.
You bet. We'll check in with you both later. And Benji, I hope you'll send me a blast or tag me when you're promoting the release of the new project. All right.
Talk bobbleheads.
All right, Susan has got bobbleheads galore now that she needs to help unload.
Space. Yeah, we need space.
So it's a really high quality product.
There's a few cases left, and the people that produce them are moving, and they want to get rid of. We're giving out a great price for $35 for 12. If you go to drdrew.com/shop, and you can just store them away for the holidays.
And this will be the end of it.
Your white elephant.
It's going to be a collectible.
There's a few cases left. We're hoping that everybody will pitch in and get some for their future white elephant gifts when
guys. That's
they make a great gift.
$3 a piece, like that. I don't even believe you can manufacture them from China for that price.
You can't.
No.
Trust me, you can't.
We're basically giving it away for shipping.
People could basically buy a case of it and then flip it online somewhere.
I'm getting a bunch of them, and I'm sending them to a few people, a few of our fans that helped us, back in the days during Dose of Dr. Drew when we were selling bobbleheads. But anyways, we want to help the people that make them open up their space. They're moving, so I can't take them all here. It costs money to ship them to me and then for me to do something with them. So we're offering them to you. Hold them up again, Drew. Show them all sides. It's really
Susan,
cute.
I know this was a well-designed product.
I know. And
it should be worth a lot more. Whoops.
Yeah, the original price was $44
Oh, so that
each.
makes more sense.
So, and then we had them.
But now it's a collector's item. It should be worth even more.
Right. And and then like I said, if he dies, it'll be worth more.
Oh, there you go. Susan's got a plan. No,
it's drdrew.com/shop, Caleb.
Let's put the...
I have those links.
drdrew.com/bobblehead.
He has that also.
I set them all up.
Has all the above.
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure everybody knows. Go to drdrew.com/shop. Help out our manufacturer. I have a bunch of them. Everybody, Caleb, you should get a set.
I have one.
So
I have one right here on my desk.
No, I mean I'll get you.
It's really good quality.
You should have a case. That's what you need down there in Mobile, Alabama.
One for all of my children.
Yeah.
So hang on here.
Well, I
Caleb,
sent a
please
case.
put up the upcoming list of guests
I'm
while we're
sorry,
discussing
I'm still
this.
selling
So
the
go ahead,
bobbleheads.
Susan. You talk about the bobblehead if you wish.
There it is.
It's really
Look how
high
cute he
quality.
is.
Look at that. Look at that. It's
I
it's
know.
high
I know,
quality.
they did
It
a
looks
really
like
good
it's been
job.
Look at
all
his
the
shoes.
coloring.
Down to his
It's
shoes.
a 360 thing too. This is like a legit. This is a legit thing here, and it has the logo. And I feel very proud because I designed this logo, and I didn't even know they were going to put it on it. So now this
Yes, you
logo
did.
I designed is everywhere, all over your products.
They're really cute. They're really cute. And then you can, share it with your mother who loves Dr. Drew and, all the gut-filled friends you have that love him. It is a fun gift.
All right,
It's funny.
I've got a few other things I want to talk
It's
about.
funny. So
Okay,
get one.
Here we go. So please put up the upcoming guests if you wouldn't mind. Also, I have two other projects I want to alert you guys about. There's the upcoming guests. Oh, I always mispronounce Michael's name. He is a former mobster who's now looking at how the government runs like a mob. March 11th, Dr. Victory sits in for me. Ralph Scholhammer on the 14th. Gary Sinise on the 19th. Dana Loesch on the 27th. Got a lot, she's filling it in. Believe me, there's a lot of interesting people, just like today's guest. I suggest you tune in to so much of this. Emily Barsh is very discerning, to use the Congresswoman's word, in whom she books and why she books them. So we all learn something from her bookings. Now, the other thing I want to point out is I've got two new projects. One is called Health Uncensored. It's on Lifetime. You can sort of Google it. I think it's on Hulu even, I think. But it has been a very interesting project, and it's growing. It's going to have an audience now. We do it down in Florida. And we bring in really interesting breakthroughs in medicine. I just think about what's been staying in my head. Last show we did, this woman is growing vascular grafts. She's an MIT-trained biologist and a physician anesthesiologist. Extraordinary things like that. Lots of things like that we get into. So that's Health Uncensored. The other thing that's coming out, I believe we have a release date. Anybody know the release date of the Discovery ID show? Susan, do you know it?
Nope.
Oh, shoot.
It's coming up. Anyways,
Caleb,
it's going to, if you
Here
go.
it is. It is March 24th, Monday, March 24th on Discovery
I was
ID.
busy today. You got that email at like 10 o'clock last night.
Yeah, I got a series of them today too. I don't see the time,
Out of the
however.
loop. I had a great show on Calling Out today. I don't know if anybody out there saw it, but it was
I think
really
it was
good.
well attended.
Tom Renz was so awesome. Oh, we still have Thomas Renz on March 10th, I believe.
Also
Oh no, we
coming in.
moved him. I think we had to move him because we have to travel that day, but
Okay.
we'll get him. Don't worry.
All
We'll be
right, I
back.
don't see the time, but keep an eye out. It's Monday, March 24th. And this trailer kind of captures the vibe of this show. We're going to air it for you in just a second. It's a really good show. The producers are exceptional. It's cinematic in its production. And we get into some of these stories of these sort of head shakers in Hollywood. What happened to why are all the Power Rangers dead? Why the Claw family, if you saw that movie, why are they all dead? And I break it down. We get into the details. We talk about the people who are really there. And of course, the story behind the story is always different than what what the press puts out there.
Right.
Another example of Gelman amnesia. But there it is. That's the promo for it, but that's right. We can't play the actual promo today. Caleb didn't have it set up.
It was on YouTube.
But I put it on Twitter. You can see it there. I think I put it on Twitter. And we'll play it maybe tomorrow. Caleb, is that
his
possible?
social media manager was busy doing a show today. I like it. Hollywood Demons. It kind of goes with the theme of my psychic medium show. So.
It does a bit. It really does, actually. Let me quickly see.
I tell you, so making the dark round.
This happens sometimes due to working with you, Drew, where I just was randomly on yahoo.com reading the news, saw an article about this, watched the trailer, and there's Drew popping up just randomly in my feed. I didn't even know anything about this coming up.
One.
Yeah, it looked really interesting. This is what we're going to watch.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's
he
so well done.
Selling a V-shred.
No. Winston Marshall coming back also.
We had to move. I feel bad now because I love Tom Renz. He was on my show today, but we had to move him because we have Monday. We have to drive to go do some work.
Tomorrow in studio will be Michael Franzese. I think I'm pronouncing it right. Franzese. Former mobster who says the government is running like a mob right now, and he's had some interaction with them that he'll share with us.
Here to our house.
That's what it says. Oh. Just what you want, a former mobster in your house, don't you?
Yeah, I can't wait. Thanks, Emily. Is this
He's a really nice guy. I was on his podcast.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a good guy. You're fine.
First, he wanted the guy from the LA Times here, and I said, "Why would we let the LA Times over into our house?" And you're like, "He's a nice guy." I was like,
"He was." He turned out to be a very interesting
I know. He didn't show up. He had a cold, but
did Caleb? Do you think you'll be able to play that trailer tomorrow?
Yes. Oh yeah, I'll have it ready to go tomorrow. We'll play it.
All right. So we'll be at noon tomorrow. We're early tomorrow.
He had a lot on his plate today because we had our show first. We had 2 shows today.
Yeah. It's been a lot going on today. So see you
There's
at noon.
There's only so much time in a day for Caleb Nation. 3 kids. Wait, 3 kids? No, 2 kids and
2 young kids.
4 dogs and a Susan Pinsky.
Yes, that's his biggest
problem.
Exactly.
That's my
life. So it is noon Pacific tomorrow. Michael Franzese, we will see you there. Ask Dr. Drew is produced by Caleb Nation and Susan Pinsky. As a reminder, the discussions here are not a substitute for medical care, diagnosis, or treatment. This show is intended for educational and informational purposes only. I am a licensed physician, but I am not a replacement for your personal doctor, and I am not practicing medicine here. Always remember that our understanding of medicine and science is constantly evolving. Though my opinion is based on the information that is available to me today, some of the contents of this show could be outdated in the future. Be sure to check with trusted resources in case any of the information has been updated since this was published. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, don't call me, call 911. If you're feeling hopeless or suicidal, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. You can find more of my recommended organizations and helpful resources at drdrew.com/help.